Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Excited. Good times for VR. We're growing fast, and we should grow also steady. There are a lot of interesting things happening around the industry. And with respect to tethered VR and all these high-level devices like Oculus and Project Morpheus and Vive and all that, my favorite platform is mobile. And that's because we can deliver the message fast and in a broader audience. What we need is a base of consumers that are interested in what we're doing. They're interested and they're inspired by having these virtual reality experiences. So a great opportunity for me to be here today and reflect with this amazing panel on best practices for mobile VR. Mobile VR. Let's see some of these devices. Gear VR. Everyone is familiar with that. It's a really nice device. You put your mobile phone and you get to places. Here's the mobile phone. Now, a lot of you might not know this little device. This little device just missed the train. It came a little bit too early. It's called My3D, and it's for sale at Amazon for, I don't know, $5 or something. It was for iPhone 3, I think. So imagine that people will trying to get into this niche of getting mobile VR for quite a while, and now is the time to do it right. So unfortunately, some people miss the train, others are coming, and we're at this point that we know that it will take off. We just want to make sure that it will be a steady, nice flight for everyone. Then we have devices like that, VR1, and as an academic, I'll bring it as an example of what to avoid. This was one of the early devices that were hard plastic and all that. No adjustment at the lenses. So one of the things I would like to discuss today is safety. How we ensure that people consume what we're doing in a safe environment and in a way that they'll not get harmed. So we have to make sure that at some point we have certification that when it goes to mobile devices, we know that all these people around the world that they're consuming, they have the choice to get a certified device that offers a comfortable experience and prevents also trauma, because there is some early evidence for children and all that. We don't know what the effect can be long term. People are talking about myopia for long term use in VR. We need to acknowledge all these things and mobilize our forces to go beyond that. And of course, we have either low-end VR devices like the Google Cardboard. And I'm very proud because everything came from this little cardboard thing. It was open sourced at MXR lab by Mark Bolas in 2012. So from a little foam device with lenses up to the high-end devices, now we're able to carry all these. I carry all these in my backpack today. And thanks to all these amazing producers to enjoy VR content at the go. So let's jump directly and discuss a bit about the devices that are available and my concerns about comfort and standardization. I would like your comments.
Well, you guys are pretty device-centric.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So, I mean, regarding safety, I mean, obviously, safety and comfort is a paramount concern. I think that, anybody that's used, Gear VR is familiar that, every time you go into Oculus Home, every time you go into Oculus Home, you have to, read and accept the health and safety warning. We have pretty clear guidelines as to, the age range. It's 13 and up. and around things like, taking breaks after, using Gear VR for an extended period of time. And of course, people should be seated, right, to ensure that, ensure their safety. So I think we have a pretty good framework around, again, like what, sort of the parameters around, again, just sort of the general, addressing the general, safety of when a consumer is using Gear VR. I mean, I can't really speak to the other devices, but again, it's of paramount concern to us.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Arthur Van Hoff. I work for Jaunt VR. We make cinematic content, which is movies in VR, mostly. So we, I totally agree with Vangelis that we should avoid trauma. I mean, that sounds bad. I think we should focus on making the experience enjoyable. And if you look at our statistics, a small minority of our content is consumed on the Oculus and the Vive and, like their devices. And that's mostly an availability issue. The majority of our content is consumed in a social environment on Google Cardboard or Gear VR. Even Gear VR is a small portion of that. Cardboard is actually, in my opinion, relatively safe because it's not strapped on. It's actually a very social experience, and the way you see people use it is they watch it for a little while and then they hand it to their friend and they watch it. So what we've seen is that, especially with music content that is aimed at young people, you end up with the content being viewed multiple times. So an average piece, like for example, you recorded R5, it's a boy band, that piece of content will be watched an average of 3 or 4 times. And I think that's mostly because it's what's in a social setting where kids are looking at the content and then passing on the phone to each other. And I think that social experience is relatively important, especially early on when VR is not very accessible. So we're very upbeat about Cardboard as an entry point to mobile VR. And then you might progress to sort of more elaborate devices like the Gear VR or the Oculus or the Vive. But primarily as an entry point, I think it is a very effective entry point. And in terms of harming people, I think that I think the thing you should worry about most of all is that your purse doesn't get stolen while you're watching something. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I think you're right. You should probably sit down. But I also think that it has to do with the content. If you make content with a lot of motion in it, then people are going to fall over when they're not sitting down. So don't put too much motion in. I mean, any moving camera, I barely can watch more than 10 seconds of motion before I become nauseous. So I think that in general, in our content, we try to avoid unnecessary motion and keep it short. I mean, keep the motion short where necessary and use it as a narrative element. If necessary. And if you do have motion, make it extremely predictable. Mm-hmm. It's straight line motion in very consistent motion, and that also helps you consume the content without struggling to stay upright. Anyway.
I actually don't agree with keeping the camera very static. I think what's important to us up here is to understand how many of you are content makers versus technologists who are building platforms and writing code. So maybe a show of hands, how many of you are interested in the content aspect? And technology. Okay, so speaking to content, I'm a content person, and that's what we've been doing at 2Bit. And what we've been doing is really activating brands in the market space. And entertainment in that way, especially in sports, which is what we've done for the past year, means there's a lot of motion. And sports in a static way is not that interesting. It's better on television, frankly. So we've tried to get in there and move the camera, and some of you may experience some motion discomfort with our work, but I haven't seen a majority of that at all. And part of that is, being inside something that's got as clear as possible with the cameras we have today, capture capability, and good editorial and sound to help offset any confusion as to what you're looking at and to feel the presence of the space, but also haptics. And we've found that using things that give you the vibration of the actual act that you've captured. And fans and other things along those lines actually mitigate motion discomfort. So in terms of best practices, I think we're all trying to figure out those best practices, and I think they range from how you capture things to the vernacular with which you pre-produce the work you're going to do, and thinking about how the camera moves and how the audience will feel while you're shooting is pretty important.
Very good. Thank you.
I think they killed it. I think they covered everything.
Well, I mean, I just want to be clear. I'm not against motion. I mean, as a creative tool, it can be very effective. But I'm more. My main concern with motion is not not nauseating people, because I think sometimes that's fine. It's just that if we're going for a mass market product, we can't nauseate half the people. Right? So we got to be very careful how motion is messaged to the user, and so that we don't get negative experiences. I want the first experience, which is likely to be on mobile, to be a good experience. That's my main objective. By the way, one thing I'm very excited about, and I know a little bit the background is the ViewMaster product that's going to come out this year. ViewMaster is a really interesting VR headset. It's not unlike a lot of the things you see here, but comes with real content, real brand, real distribution, real marketing, and it's marketed at kids. So, this is going to open up a whole new generation of VR users. And, I don't know if you've seen some of the preview videos that they have. It's going to be very, very compelling to kids. And there's going to be a lot of interest in kid-oriented content as a result, which I think can be really effective in VR.
Great, although we have to be careful with young ages, we need to see what the science is behind it for consumption, at least define the limits of maybe the duration of the experiences. But one thing that I particularly like about mobile VR is that it's untethered. So a lot of times, if you try to consume the content with Oculus and all that, it's like you strap around with cables. With Google Cardboard, which is a handheld HMD, you can just, as you said, distribute it around with your friends and all that. And also, with current technologies of motion tracking, you can have untethered VR based on mobile phones that you can actually walk around the place. And we know that reduces nausea close to zero, because it's like you're an actor in the volumetric space that you capture. Do you envision VR for the future being this mobile thing that you have to see it and all that, or you see a new avenue related to what, let's say, the Void is doing and other people that try to merge the physical space with the digital one?
I mean, I think mobile VR is going to be around for forever. I mean, I think everyone's going to have a mobile phone. So I think that's almost a given. I don't know where that came from. It wasn't my phone, but I think there's going to be just like lots of different fidelities of VR experiences, right? I think that I think I'm trying.
I think
the mic's not working.
Can you speak to the other one, please?
Sure. Hand this over, buddy. I think there'll be multiple fidelities. I think tethered experiences offer you, it's tracking you in the environment, so it's kind of giving you a completely different experience in the VR than mobile. I think mobile gives you high accessibility. It's really good for video, and I think it's great to pass around in a party situation. In the bigger cave rooms are a totally different experience. So I think we're going to have all that VR all happening. And I think for a developer, you have to think about how do you make some of that VR scale across multiple platforms, so you're actually able to, maximize your budget. So how do you shoot something that might be for gear, but you know that you're going to want to use some of that content in a room scale environment because you're going to build a synthetic volume to put some of that video in. So I think that thinking through all those problems will actually help you get your VR to be in both places at the same time, while giving people two different experiences at the same time. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yes.
And to Arthur's point about passing the headset around, I think that the hardware manufacturers, whether it's Samsung or any of these guys or Cardboard, I think that it's actually quite problematic when you're actually really doing it because they're constantly pausing or the Android phone's failing out. And I think that to actually boost the experience, it's sort of out of our hands and it's really in the hands of the hardware manufacturers to really improve that experience. Because I think that when the internet was first starting, you'd always see like 15 people gathered around the one person that had the internet on their computer. And that's how everyone sort of got like into the internet. And this is kind of going back to '94. I think that's happening with VR right now, but it's like, it's a pain in the ass to take it off. It pauses, you got to go back in, restart it. I think that all of that's got to get worked out, and I think that makes everyone who's making content's experience a lot more fun.
You know, for making content, distribution is really the critical point right now. On top of making something really good that people can look at.
We go to distribution, but
to that end, so if you're going to use Vive or you're going to use a Gear VR, you're going to use Cardboard or whatever you're going to use, make the content work for that platform and across all platforms. So make good content, and you know, in the same way that you might use a Nikon or a Red, you know, think about the tools that you have and prepare your material so it works well and everything. Make it high resolution, make the stitches really good, make the story compelling, advanced character, advanced plot, have great sound. Give us an experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of time you hear VR people talking, they're always talking about the stitching or the visual or the camera movement, but I actually think that, you know, any great cinema is, if you listen to the sound very carefully, it's telling a very interesting story, and it's driving the story often. And I think the whole VR community can use lots of people coming in with the perspective of how do you tell story via audio while in a headset, while wearing headphones, because you actually are wearing headphones and you can actually get great fidelity when you're wearing the headphone. And I think that adding that to the visual will actually make way better VR, and it's not that hard. We have great audio people. We just got to bring them into this community and get them working on VR with us.
Great. I'll continue just a bit more into the navigation problem and nausea. So as you said, it's not exactly a problem moving the camera, but it's how you move the camera.
Yeah.
I agree with that. In terms of live VR, pretty much, you know, we with some guidelines, people can create interesting content. When it comes to games, a lot of times I see experiences that they use this, that it's really counterproductive for VR. When you navigate with your cursors around in an environment, you feel the nausea. The handheld devices like the Google Cardboard doesn't have that because your hands are occupied, but for Samsung and all the other genre of mobile VR devices that are head-mounted, you can use that. Do you have a vision on the future of movement and controllers in these virtual reality experiences when it consumed on the go?
I mean, we've developed a software technology that allows you to do interactive video. So we do allow you to move inside of the video, and we're experimenting with what works and what doesn't work, what makes people nauseous, what doesn't, and you know, it affects people different ways. But we think that in order to make video passively interactive, I think that you're going to have some movement, some system, whether it's a gaze or whether it's some sort of joystick kind of haptics tool. I think that that's inevitable, because if you're going to want to explore a place that you shot in video, I think you're going to need to create sort of hotspots and move in those things. How you move that individual through that space is an experimentation. Also, you have to figure out how that works with the story so it doesn't mess with your story. I think interesting, Google made you move in Street View in a very interesting way. It sort of parallaxed you through it. And if you were just looking at that screen and that did it, that would also make people slightly bugged out. I think the problem is you're disembodied. When you don't have all your systems in which keeps you balanced, which is your eyes, your arms, and your gyroscopes all off and the camera's moving, you're going to make people woozy no matter what. And so I think that you can actually add very small effects into your VR where it's giving you some body, some stationary system. So you can move the camera a lot in a car because you're in a cockpit. And it's very effective. You don't get woozy. As soon as you take people out of that, you start getting woozy. So I think that it's not an engineering thing. It's actually a storytelling thing. It's like, how are you going to tell a story? How are you going to move a camera? How are you going to do transitions? And at the same time, be able to use sort of that engineering methodologies where you actually test and fast fail out any woozy kind of capabilities. So I think that, to answer your question, I think we're going to be moving the camera, we're going to be doing interactive video, and we're going to actually figure out how not to make people sick. But there's a spectrum of people that get sick. There's people that watch 3D videos in a movie theater and they get sick. So like, we're not going to solve that person's problem. That's a corner case. But in the average person, you're going to be able to probably make people very happy with VR and have some movement.
The real problem is when it's induced by design, because
I think I think inducing woozy by design is not a good thing.
If it hurts, don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But so when I first tried the Oculus, it was using the Portal game, and that has very little motion in it, and it was, you know, a really interesting and new experience on the DK1. I was really impressed by that. But then when you start trying first-person shooters, you realize that, you know, although I initially thought that these games are already in 3D, they just translate over directly. You're absolutely right, they don't. Right?
They don't,
you need to think about a new type of game. And you can already see this on the Vive demos and some of the games that are out that are much more static and much more oriented around you overseeing the world that you're manipulating, or you building the house that you're, you know, in Mindstorms or what have you. And that's just a different type of game. And I think if you go in that direction, then, you know, the controller is a tool. It's a wand. It's your hand. It's not, you know, the accelerator or the brake.
Exactly.
Right? And that's the thing to do. And another thing I want to point out is that when we got started, we looked at games, and we're not game developers, so we said, well, look, what can we do in terms of an entertainment experience that doesn't require a lot of interactivity? Because, you know, I've done lots of startups and mostly very technical, and I'm now doing something that my mom knows how to use, and that's the very first time. And the only reason that's true is that it doesn't require a controller. It is literally a ViewMaster. You put it on and you look around, and actually looking around is already a lot of control. And people don't realize that even that is a burden for the user. And if you can abuse that, right? If you have a story that is, you know, full 360 where you have to look behind you, you know, this becomes a chore, right? So I think even in the extent of the how you surround the viewer with the story, you need to make a conscious decision of whether it's going to be effective or whether it's going to be tiring or a chore. So, you know, those are all creative choices you can make, and we're sort of learning what works and what doesn't work. And in my personal opinion, I think that you want to assume a user is sitting in a stationary chair and has, you know, like 200 degrees range of motion, and occasionally may look all the way around, but you don't want them to have to look behind you. You know, but those are just, you know, creative choices that will learn what works and what doesn't work. And also I think different devices, some things work well and some things don't. But.
So what do you think about how to successfully immerse this new market? I mean, who is our audience? How much they're willing to pay per minute? I mean, what's your model for distribution?
Well, our view is that, you know, in the short term, it's going to be mostly promotional content and free to download. I mean, the market doesn't exist in the sense that there's a market to make a lot of money. I mean, the people that have tried to charge money for content, you know, didn't make a lot of money because there just isn't an audience yet. So I think our objective here at VRLA is to create and educate an audience. Right, and that's our main objective, and we should all be working towards that. So let's create great experiences that people love, and let's figure out ways to pay for that. And I think the way to pay for that is to, you know, make them, you know, marketing materials, advertising materials, have, you know, sponsored by bands or music or concerts, what have you. And then eventually you will get to experiences that are so compelling that people will be willing to pay for them. But like if I today would sell you a concert experience, an hour-long concert experience for $15, you know, would you really, you know, you first have to make the conscious decision that you're going to be able to sit and watch something in VR for an hour, and that's, you know, not setting aside all the issues in audio and stitching and all the quality issues that you might not be happy with. So, I think that we're not ready there. I mean, in terms of the market, the technology, we need to educate people on what works and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. But we're getting there.
What about the others? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with Arthur. I do think it's obviously very early days. With our virtual reality content service, Milk VR, all the content that's in there is currently free, and I can't address if there's any future plans, obviously, to monetize, but. We've worked with several brands. One of the videos we're showing right now in our booth is Do VR Snow, which is, by the way, a great example of using motion, capturing motion. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of brands involved. But again, it's sort of, we're still in the experimental phase, right? So is it the right time to start charging people? I'd say it's a little bit premature, right? I mean, we've got to get to the point where people are making, the content at a level of quality that people want to pay for it, right? Because people are used to on other mediums paying for it, right? I mean, there's no issue paying for it on, a Netflix or Hulu or different services. So, but that's quality that people expect from a TV or a major motion picture. So I think. Once the content, I mean, obviously it's continuing to mature, but once it matures to a certain level, then we'll be ready, to start monetizing it, and people will be happy to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, at some level, VR is not any different than any other media model. You're either it's ad supported or people are buying it. I just think that sort of discussing selling VR content is just early when the market isn't really started yet. But I would say I think I foresee people are able to sell content that does something unique and interesting for that person. So there's a lot of mobile apps right now that are helping you like meditate, for example, and people are paying for that, or like you're training your brain. Like they'll pay money for that kind of stuff, where they feel like they're getting an immediate benefit. So I think people that can actually think about how to like make something special and and address a small target market inside the VR space, or convert them from their current business into a VR app, that they'll probably pay for that. I don't think they're going to pay for like, hey, here's me standing in Syria. You know what I mean? I think that's going to be hard to sell. But I think eventually, in a decade, yes, it will just be like a regular media business. So.
Well, I also think I'm optimistic because, if you think about a concert experience, for example, we can put you in the first row of Paul McCartney concert, for example, and that would cost you $500, $600 to buy that ticket. But so for $5, that's a really good price. But we can do better than that. Or we can put you at the piano with Paul McCartney. Now that's a ticket you cannot buy. There's no such ticket to buy, right? So, I think that there's a lot of tickets that just haven't been invented yet that we can sell to people that are going to be very compelling, that people are going to pay good money for, once they are convinced that the technology is, real and compelling enough.
And comfortable.
Comfortable,
one of the things I like about using Gear VR and the activations we've done, and we've done that because it's without a tether, and we had 30,000 people going through one of them, for example, is that it is bright enough and crisp enough for the experience to be immersive the way VR should be, therefore exposing audiences to the possibility and turning people on to what they imagine could be a fantastic VR experience. And I think that's important. I think it's important on Cardboard, in Vive, on DK2, on anything that is out there doing VR and hopefully AR in the future. And it's really about all of us here driving that technology and the storytelling forward to grow that audience and to make everything possible. The constraints of what makes people sick or what isn't physiologically okay will be worked out. They have to be. And I think being so afraid to push the envelope creatively because of what could go wrong has never been what filmmakers have done. So I hope to see a lot of people showing me what's really cool and leading me down crazy avenues to experiment. I think one of the things I loved, by the way, is I did see the McCartney piece on cardboard, and then I saw it on in a Gear VR, and I saw it, when I saw it in the Gear, I heard it with a really great mix by Dolby, and it made a huge difference. So all of you should be thinking about sound, because if we're thinking about where we are, it's what the room sounds like. So all those things, all those technical elements, you have a lot to learn. We all have a lot to learn. Is there a parallax problem? Are we getting good stitches? Is the exposure right? Is there a great refresh rate in the phone? Is there a great tetherless opportunity? Am I using the tracking well? Is the audio good? I mean, there's so many things for us all to think about. Is my compression really well done so that the streaming is really dynamic? Have I charged my mobile phone? I mean, let's all think about all the things we have to think about in doing this, and let's advance really great, talk about viral goodness in this space together.
And don't forget that one of our big audiences, I think, for VR consumption is the elderly, because they hold the most important currency of all, and that is time. So they have a lot of time. They want to travel to places and don't have mobility. So I'm just putting out there that I believe one of the biggest markets for virtual reality is the elderly, and we should create some content to accommodate their needs.
The elderly like
Would
Paul
you agree?
McCartney. Is that? The elderly likes Paul McCartney.
Yeah, of course.
So it's being done.
Okay,
These platforms are so different. Vive is unbelievable, and it's so immersive in a three-dimensional way. It feels tactile, and it's really different than what you see with Oculus. And Viewmaster is really different. I mean, every one of these is different, so make your stories work for the platform, just like you would for an IMAX movie versus something you're going to project in your home with a Pico projector off of your iPhone. I mean,
Yeah, I just think if you're a creative person, I think that our mantra at our company is be brave. You know, don't take your television history or your filmmaking history into VR. Really actually check that at the door and say you're entering a new medium. And then when you're stuck, you can use some of the stuff that you learned in your past life for VR. But VR is a totally new medium, and I think that we got to treat it that way. And we have to be really, really brave, because just seeing a bunch of stuff that you could see probably better on a flat screen in VR isn't really a win for the community and for the audiences. So I think being more brave, you know, what you said earlier, I think is right on, is like actually really exploring. And then your creative and your tech will find the audience, and that audience will eventually, either buy your stuff or advertisers will say, I want to reach your audience. But if we're not brave and we're just sort of bringing the old into the new, it's not a win. It's actually a bore. And, YouTube did that. YouTube just didn't throw up old TV shows. That's what got them popular. It was SNL videos that got them popular. But at some point, people just started talking to their laptops, and that became an audience and a format and a business. I think we need to do that with VR. We need to be way brave and move past old media, because it's a new medium. That's my personal opinion, and our company's opinion.
Yeah, and just really quickly to echo that, in terms of being brave and trying to find new and innovative ways to create content in VR. So Samsung recently announced our Gear Indie initiative. So there's sort of three different components of that, and the overarching theme is really to foster these emerging, filmmakers in the 360 space, or content creators in the 360 space. So one component of that is the Gear Indie channel, which we recently launched in Milk VR, where we're showcasing, just content that people are uploading to Milk VR, and sort of the best of the indie content that we're seeing. Another component of that is we will be announcing several contests in order to, really inspire people and generate a lot of content. And the third component of that is that we are, establishing and working with several mentors or mentors, that are going to work, very closely with, folks in the Gear Indie program. Nancy Bennett is one that we've announced, and there are, several other high-profile people, in the 360 space that'll also be working with us. So, we're really pleased and really looking forward to the types of content that we're going to be seeing, and hopefully that'll drive a lot of innovation in the content space.
All right. So we're about to finish in a couple of minutes. So how far away are we from telepresence? What about real-time streaming, and what do you think can happen there? Because it's a social aspect of VR, right?
So if you come to our office, we can show you a live stream. I mean, the problem is bandwidth, right? I mean, if you want to do it at a reasonable resolution, you're going to need gigantic bandwidth, and I think that's probably unreasonable today. I think those are things that are just naturally going to come. I mean, one of the big transitions that we're going to go through is from 802.64 to HEVC. So we're going to gain back about half the bandwidth that we lost somewhere. So that will allow us to go to higher resolutions at the same bandwidth. That will help a lot. But it also means that you have to have different encoders, different decoders. Pay license fees. It's going to take a few years, but that's going to be a big help, especially when you're doing live
because
streaming.
you mentioned the concert is very appealing, but it's even more appealing if it's at the day of the concert at least, or within a reasonable frame that it's happening in London, I'm there. It's happening in New York, I'm there. It's happening.
I think that is true, but you got to sort of think about, that there has to be an audience at that moment, right? If you can find 10,000 viewers that want to see that content, and have the bandwidth and have the gear, and that are plugged in at that moment, that are willing to sit down without being able to find their beer for 3 hours, then go for it, right? But that audience is non-existent today. So, I'm all for live, but live is going to happen when there's millions of people consuming VR on a regular basis. Again, until then, I think the concert is just as good a week later. Right? And that's actually, a more convenient way for us to produce it today, and for you to consume it, because you can consume it when you're at home, or when you're traveling, or if you're in the airplane or something like that.
One little thought about that. In the sports space, like the NBA, for example, 1% of their fan base actually goes to the game. The rest are digital viewers, and majority are in Asia and China, so there might be an exception there for the live viewer. But sports is usually an event that takes place at one given moment, and that moment is past when the game is done and you don't want to watch it again. So there may be some opportunity there.
Well, the trick with sports, I agree with Nancy that that's the one compelling case, but the trick with sports, of course, that a football game is incredibly well produced on 2D TV today. So you're competing with 2D TV, and that is just a very tough competition.
Yes.
I would like to thank you very much.
I just want to say one other thing. Try and do 3D instead of 2D. It's really hard, but it really makes a difference.
Yeah, come to us.
Thank you very much for the contribution.